99 north, or 99 in the north side.
So you said you looked at it. Y'all gonna buy it?
Well, we know the guy. He's 80 years old, and you know, he's very, very wealthy, and kind of probably wrapping up things. But you get to be at a certain point, you just take your, when you don't need the money, you just, if you like the people, you give them a good deal. If you don't like them, you know, you get full price.
All right, we're gonna kick it off in just a minute. How big were the lots? Or would this be like a development?
One was 26 acres, and I think one was 4 or 5 acres.
So it definitely could be a development project.
Well, one of them, they've already spent $50,000 in engineering, platting it out and everything. So a lot of the engineering work has been done, and that's not cheap. And because it's been approved, it's been grandfathered in. So kind of interesting.
Well, we have a few people jumping on, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody. This is our weekly training that we do. We're glad to be here every Wednesday right here at 6 o'clock. We apologize that we are a couple minutes late today. But before we jump in, because tonight is such an important topic, it's a popular topic, do us a favor, hit the like button, hit the share button, and invite some friends because they don't want to miss out on this. You know, we're seeing some opportunities come, you know, to us here in the very, very near future. And if you're serious about, you know, real estate investing and getting into the real estate game and getting off of the sidelines, this is something that you need to watch, pay attention to tonight, and take some notes. So again, if you can, invite some friends, hit the share button, and at the same time, let us know where you're tuning in from. Say hello. At the end, we'll open it up for a few questions. Might be a little difficult because tonight's topic will generate a ton of questions. But what we're going to be talking about is there's lots of talks about foreclosures coming in, and we're going to see, you know, we could see a tsunami of foreclosures coming soon. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. You know, is that happening? What we need to be looking for and paying attention to, and how we can seize this opportunity. So, Ray, I'm going to hand it over.
You broke up. I think you said you were going to hand it over to me. Is that all right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. So what we do every year at our 2 units, one in San Antonio and one in Houston, is we do a session on market report and a session on goal setting. And I did the market report for both San Antonio and Houston. I like doing it because once a year, it gives me an opportunity. Usually we'll do it twice a year, but this one, it gives me an opportunity to kind of dive deep. I get more out of it than anybody in the audience because when I put this together, tons of different reports, and then we end up kind of presenting the data that we think our investors and partners need to know. And it's usually stuff that is interesting to me. So we really dug deep into, that was one of the big questions, what's going to happen to market values moving forward? What's going to happen with potential pin-up foreclosures? Because basically the foreclosure and eviction moratoriums have recently been removed, and it takes a while for those things to ramp up to where they turn into sales. You know, it's not like you just say, oh, I'm going to go evict somebody and they're going to be out tomorrow, or I'm not going to just go do a foreclosure and they're going to be out. They're going to be out tomorrow. It takes a while. Hold on, I got to shut a door because I hear a lot of background noise.
Yeah, so we're going to dive into it tonight. Ray has actually been investing, you know, for quite a while. He's been through multiple cycles, and I know ever since I've been in it since 2013, every year or two, you know, we hear, oh, we're in a bubble. The bubble's about to burst. Well, Ray has been through multiple cycles where he's seen that, and he's seeing some signs. And plus, we have some inside information that is really pointing to these signs, and that this is happening.
Yeah. So like in 2006 and 2007, really the crash in 2007 happened in 2008. And it actually happened in 2007, but nobody knew it, except unless you owned a mortgage company, then you knew it, because all of a sudden they turned off the money spigots. So like from 2000 to 2007, I'm getting feedback from somebody, I don't know who it's from, but from 2000 to 2007, it was an up market and everybody thought it would never end. And it was just like, that became their paradigm. Like, this is the way real estate is. And it's not like that. The markets swing wildly. So a lot of these people in 2000, I'm going to say 2018, 2017, we're really starting to come out and say, oh, it's time for the market to change and all that crap. And it's like, they're just saying it because it's been that length of time. Well, you hit something on really, really important, because around 2010 to 2009, those people that bought the right assets are retired now. If they did it right, they're retired, because their values have gone up 3 and 4 times, sometimes even more than that. And our interest rates have been super low this whole time. So a lot of people that are out there think that this is because this is the only market they come out that they've had in their whole investing career. They think they're geniuses, and they just haven't been through a down market. And they're going to find out that there's a lot more geniuses, a lot less geniuses out there than we realize. So I think you got to, if you've been through 3 or 4 markets, you're smart enough to keep an eye on what's going to happen in the future and what's happening now. And believe it or not, they say timing the market. Some people, if you time the market and you're looking at data and real information, it becomes more doable. It's not that you can absolutely predict what's going to happen in the future, but you can kind of start seeing trends, and you can start seeing how people are buying, what's going on with employment, what's going on with population growth, which are the 2 biggies. And when they say real estate's local, those are the kinds of things you want to look at. Now, in one of our areas, we had a person who is who works with he's basically a foreclosure realty, and he works with a lot of the mortgage people and a lot of the attorneys that start the foreclosures. And we had some good feedback from him, good information from him as to what's happening. And if you want, we can dive into, what did the market data tell us and what did some of our insider information tell us, because it's kind of interesting to put them together. Well,
before we do that, I definitely want to do that. I want to find out what what inside information he has. But before we get into that, there's a couple of things that I do want you to kind of explain a little bit. Is one, why is it important to know about what's going on with the foreclosures, and why is it such a great opportunity coming for real estate investors, whether they're new or intermediate or seasoned? It's a great opportunity. And then, is it better to buy a foreclosure, or is it better to buy a pre-foreclosure? So I want you to kind of go through that, and then we can talk about what Harold has told you.
Okay, so which question you want me to, because I think you asked like 3 or 4 questions. Let's just name the question, and then let's talk about it.
Well, let's talk about foreclosures and why it's such a great opportunity, and why it's important to know what's going on with it.
Well, so why do a lot of people buy foreclosures, and why they're typically good opportunities the good thing, not the good thing, but the interesting thing about real estate, it's not like a collector car or coins or currency or silver or gold. It's not something that you can just hide in your backyard or park in a garage, and just by its nature, it's going to go up in value. Real estate costs money to control and manage the whole time you have it. So it's not static. So if you have a real estate out there and you're not generating income, it's a liability. If you're generating income, it's it's an asset, because as an asset, it does so much for you. And so there's 5 or 6 really valuable ways that real estate makes you wealthy. But if it's not performing, the not performing part, when it's not performing, you can't pay debt, you can't pay taxes, you can't pay insurance, you can't manage it, it gets vandalized, all kinds of bad things happen. So the good thing with real estate is it's either a liability or asset. The fact that it's a liability is what creates the opportunities. The fact that it's an asset is what creates wealth. And so just having real estate, you also got to know the best way and proper ways to manage it. So there's a few things you got to get right. Now, the fact that people get into that there's been a foreclosure moratorium, and now that that's been lifted, and that there you have a certain level of delinquencies, and we looked at those in the market areas that we try to buy in. We look at those level of delinquencies, they're high or low or whatever, and that's important to us. So when you have those delinquencies, and you have a low priority and a high priority delinquency, or a minor delinquency or major delinquency, and it's usually 30 days late, or it's 90 days. And when it goes past 90 days, it kind of puts it in another category. And so that's kind of when they start really going into default. And foreclosures, even in good markets, you're going to have a lot of foreclosures because people get divorced, people die, the houses burn down, or houses sustain significant damage. There's just a bunch of different reasons why foreclosures happen, legitimate reasons. And when they happen, if you have an opportunity to buy those before the foreclosure gets finalized. And so when we look at foreclosures, think of those as like 3 different times. There's the pre-foreclosure, there's the post-foreclosure, and there's during the foreclosure. And so like in the 80s and 90s, the post-foreclosures was a great place to play. And there's lots of strategies like buying the note and then you become the foreclosure person, things like that. So in the 80s and 90s, we did a lot of that. And then short sales came along. So that's a pre-foreclosure. Getting to the foreclosure, to the people selling before the foreclosure, if you can solve the people's problem and help them, a lot of times you can end up with it as a pre-foreclosure. And then there's the actual foreclosure. So like every state's are a little bit different. They generally follow the same rules. So if you're an expert on one, it's not a big jump to become an expert on another. But like in Texas, for example, you got what they call Super Tuesday. So all across the state, foreclosures happen on the first Tuesday of the month. Now, different states, different rules. So you got the Super Tuesday. Well, if you we bought literally at 5 minutes before the property was going up for the sale on the Tuesday. So that's a pre-foreclosure. And that pre-foreclosure can happen anywhere from a minute before it sells to weeks, months before it sells, just depending on how you're working the pre-foreclosure. Now, once it becomes a foreclosure, you can buy it at the sale. And one of your questions was, when is it best to buy? So, and then once it gets foreclosed, then if it goes back to the lender, we call that an REO. Or there's different names, but ORE, REO, but REO is probably the most popular, and that stands for real estate owned. So once it becomes a foreclosure, then you're dealing with whoever foreclosed on it. And the majority of the time, it's an institution. Oftentimes, it's a individual. If it's an individual, you got some post foreclosure options. If it's an institution, you got post foreclosure options. You got to know if they're large institutions, say like a Wells Fargo or Bank of America, you got to know what their policy is for working these things. And I'll just tell you, like in 2008, 2009, we were buying a lot of foreclosures. So if it's a large foreclosure, the way I thought of it to help me understand it is if it's a community bank or credit union, I could go to them and talk to them. And if it made sense for us to do business, I could buy it as a post foreclosure. If it's somebody like a Wells Fargo or Bank of America, think of it as like a solid iron pipe, and the foreclosure goes in here. And however long it takes to get through that process, it comes out the other end. And they have a very specific way they handle all those foreclosures, and they very rarely make any exceptions. So if it's a large institution, just think of it as like a steel pipe. Once it goes in and it becomes a foreclosure, until it gets listed with an asset manager, it's not going to be available. So if you're looking at a really hot market, then post foreclosures are probably not going to be where us investors want to go unless there's serious damage. And that's why we wanted to get Pat on our team, because Pat is a rehab expert, and I'm a rehab expert, but we let Pat do that coaching call, because you're going to find a lot of the deals when they're post foreclosures and you do the rehab right and you do the estimate right and you don't go out of business on your first rehab. So being a master at the rehab is important. And that's the post foreclosure. At the foreclosure, so that's one version of the three versions. At the foreclosure, in the large markets, it just doesn't make sense to buy at the foreclosure 99 times out of 100 unless you're operating on a really big scale. And we don't have enough time on this call to talk about the 2 or 3 strategies that we know work at the foreclosure, but there's 2 or 3 strategies, and it's probably something we don't want to talk in public about anyway. It's kind of what goes on behind closed doors conversation. So, but there's some real strategies that you can do during the foreclosure, but 99 people out of 100 don't understand it. They're not operating on that level. They're never going to make it work in the big markets. And when I say big markets, Texas has, like, depending on your state, but if you have a large MSA, like 1 million plus people, that's a big market. So in Texas, we've got 4 of those, really 5 of those markets in Texas alone. So if you're in one of those big markets, I would probably avoid doing at the foreclosure type deal without knowing what you're doing. And there's ways we can learn how to know what you're doing, but it's really pretty exciting and a lot of fun. And I do recommend, like for all our students, they need to go to the foreclosure sales. And if it's somewhere where I'm near them, I'll go with them to the foreclosure sale and I'll point out some of the things that people are doing. And there's a lot of, once you pull the curtains back, you see a lot of things other people don't. Now, so that's the second thing. So we got post foreclosures, during the foreclosures, and then pre-foreclosure. Now, pre-foreclosure, I think y'all heard me say that I consider myself an expert on rehabbing. Well, there's another thing I decided 30 years ago I needed to become really, really good at, and that's negotiation. And both of these things are designed to make me a better buyer. And as a negotiator, in the pre-foreclosures, you're dealing with people, human beings. They're trying to solve the problems. They're in a bad situation. Sometimes they deserve to be in that situation because of the things people do. But a lot of times they don't deserve to be in that situation, or if things happen, a spouse dies, they get sick, they have health problems, they get 2 months behind, and then the mortgage company, for whatever reason, doesn't want to work with them or can't work with them. And by the way, mortgage companies generally want to work with the people, right? Foreclosure is not good for anybody, even if there's lots of equity in it. All my experience of doing pre-foreclosures, other than dealing with individuals, I've never seen any institution just going for trying to recapture serious amounts of equity. They really try to make it work. And that's good because it really is a human beings in this process. And so if you're going to do pre-foreclosures, you got to learn how to negotiate. You got to learn how to do creative deals. And that's the name of our group. I mean, it's not an accident. We call ourselves Massive Passive because it's all about learning and how to make creative deals and putting creative deals together that work for both the buyer and the seller, because you're dealing with real people that have real problems. And so the pre-foreclosure is another way to work on the pre-foreclosures. And I know it sounds like I said a lot of different things. It's one of those things where if you hear it a couple of times or 3 or 4 times, then you can kind of get the general outline. But the next step is to dig deeper and figure out how we want to do it. For example, if you're buying at the foreclosure, I've got a buddy that when he goes to the foreclosures, he has in his briefcase $1 million in cashier's checks, and he's buying. And at the foreclosure, you're buying with cash right then on the spot. Pre-foreclosure, you're taking over mortgages. The seller may own or finance you. There's tons and tons of creative deals. Post-foreclosure, it's generally cash. 9 times, maybe even more, 9 times out of 10, you're coming to the closing with cash on post-foreclosures. The difference is at the foreclosure sale, it's cash. You don't really get a lot of time to inspect the property. Oftentimes, the investor can't even get in the property. So that's at the foreclosure. Post-foreclosure, you have time to do your due diligence. You have time to get money from a hard money lender or a private money lender. And yes, they're not the same. But you have time to do it. Now think about that. If you're doing foreclosures, do you want to be where it's easy to buy the houses or where it's hard to buy the houses? Right? And a lot of people get that wrong. But the harder it is to get the asset, basically the more niche it is and the more opportunities there are. So that guy that's walking to the auction with $1 million in cashier's check or cash in his briefcase, he's a hard player. He's a sharp player. He knows what he's doing, and he knows the game. He knows the tricks. He knows ways to get the outcome he wants. In a real live auction, you might say, no, Ray, it's real regulated. Just trust me. There's ways and methods that these guys use at the foreclosure. But they're also, who can come to a table and bring $1 million of cash or cashier's check and buy a property without walking in it. And so that is probably where a lot of the opportunities. Now, pre-foreclosures in a big market, you have a lot of competition, but it's worth the fight, in my opinion. You can hit some real home runs, especially if you get good at learning your scripts, doing the negotiating, and just being an overall good person and a likable person. You know, we say it over and over: no trust like, no trust like. Those need to be branded on your forehead. So we're okay with the pre-foreclosure. And a lot of times you can make great deals and not have a ton of cash in the deal. So I probably went on longer than you wanted me to, but thank God I didn't drill down in any one of the three. So
just a little bit. I'm used to you hogging the show and going down rabbit holes, but that was great. But one of the things I did want to point out, you touched on a couple of them, but you really didn't say too much about it. But one of the things that makes like pre-foreclosure attractive versus buying at the auction is one, motivation. The closer it gets to the auction, the more motivated the seller is.
right.
And two, if you get it before the auction, then you have one more time, you have more options in more ways to put the deal together versus at the auction. I mean, you have to pay cash for it. But when you're at, a pre-foreclosure, you're talking to a seller that they're going to auction. That's when you can offer to take over payments or some sort of other type of creative deal. And that allows you to get in to that property for a lot less than what you potentially would have to.
Yeah. And the post foreclosure, when it becomes an REO, typically the people marketing it are very good at marketing. And right now it's a seller's market. So that means it's hard to get great deals on the REO. And so that's post foreclosure. Pre-foreclosures, if you can get access to the seller and figure those steps out, you can get in the house, you can see it just like in the post foreclosures. During the foreclosures, you typically can't get in the house. Now, there are ways to get in the house depending on how the deal comes down, but on pre-foreclosures, you have more time. And that's where wholesalers live. That's the wholesalers get in, try to lock those properties up, and then try to sell them to other people. And there's some strategies in dealing with wholesalers. If you're a wholesaler, there's some really cool strategies on right ways to do that. I don't remember if it was you, James, or somebody else. I think it was maybe, I don't think it was you, but there was a deal where the wholesaler got involved in a transaction and he followed the rules on everything I said, and he ignored me on one thing, and he lost the deal because he ignored me. And so there's certain things that if you're going to be a wholesaler in a pre-foreclosure, there's certain things you want to do, like the basic things like the script, the contract, and negotiating. But then when you get to market that, you have to be super careful, especially if it's a pre-foreclosure, because there's very limited time. The people are very motivated. They literally will ignore the fact that they signed a contract with you and signed it with their signature and guaranteed, when you sign a contract that you're legally can be bound. And then an hour later, they might sign the contract with somebody else. So there's lots of strategies on the pre-foreclosures that we have to be careful of. And the big lesson, and this is a lesson that it's taken me over 30 years to learn, and I keep learning it because every time I screw it up, I relearn it. When you get a property under contract, you need to close as quick as you can. You need to get, as long as there's as long as there's a seller on the other end, you've got 100 more variables than you do when you get rid of them, or than what you're bringing to the table, because there's so many things that can go wrong when the seller's involved. So the sooner you get them out of the picture, the better.
So we're about 30 minutes in. So we know like what a pre-foreclosure is. We kind of know a little bit about what to look for and why a pre-foreclosure is good. Let's get into what we promised we were going to deliver. And that is that we have some inside information that points directly to the signs and confirms the signs that you're seeing, that the market is shifting and that there's, a good possibility of a lot of foreclosures that we're going to have the opportunity to get. Do you want to, so I'm going to hand it back over to you so you can share that inside information for everybody.
So we've got a few things going on in the market. We had the markets I've been in when there could have been a lot of inventory was the RTC days, late 80s. I was just beginning and I didn't know how to scale. And then we had which was terrible because that was like the absolute best time in the down markets I've ever seen to buy properties. Then we had the 2007, and now we have now. And what happened in 2007, there's a thing that was created called shadow inventory. And everybody talked about it for 4 to 5 years solid. I mean, when we were doing our market reports, we were reporting on it and we were watching. It kept growing. And then all of a sudden the market stabilized and started growing and it started shrinking. And why that was so important is because they never dumped houses in the marketplace. Okay. They never dumped it in the marketplace. So now here we are in 2021 and 2022, the moratorium's been removed. A lot of people they're upside down in their deals. They're in the 90-day delinquencies. But with something we have here, we have record high equity in properties. 2007, people didn't have high equities. And just to give you a scenario real quick, if a property is worth $100,000, by the time you got a 3% or 5% conventional loan or an FHA loan or a VA loan, even with your down payment, your balance, say the sales price, and I'm picking 100 because that's pretty low, but it's a simple number. So if you say the sales price of the buyer when they bought it was 100,000, by the time they get their loan and everything done, they owed 95,000 to 102 or 103,000 on that $100,000 property. So when the market stopped going up and the values actually started going down, people's equity was wiped out. So they couldn't sell because most people can't bring $5,000 to closing because they're upside down 5,000. Now, some people could. We had actually people paying us to buy their houses. I remember once we had a guy willing to pay us $30,000 to buy his house. And and basically just take over the payment. And we didn't do it because it just didn't make sense. So so this market cycle, we have record high equity. But what we do, so we don't think that the foreclosures are going to be a tsunami on that level. But what we do know is that interest rates have been historically low for the last 5 years or so. So they've been super low, 4 years. So we know there's these loans that go in default Are these houses going to default? There's a lot of financing out there that might be able to be taken over without approval, without credit checks or whatever. So there's going to be a lot of foreclosures, but it's not going to be a tsunami, in my opinion. And it's not just mine. There's a lot of people here do this economy forecasting for a living. And a lot of people I look up to, like CoreLogic and a couple of others. I don't want to say their names, but they've got really good economists that look at the housing data. They pretty much all agree that we're not going to have that tsunami. But if you're working pre-foreclosures, then I think you're going to still get a lot of opportunities because people are going to either do modifications, they're going to do forbearances, they're going to do short sales, or it's time for them to move on and they don't want to bring it current. And if somebody would just come to them with a halfway decent offer, they would take it. Now, some people are getting confused. They're thinking it's such a hot market, but our inventory, our monthly inventory from June to December went up 50%. It's still super low, but it went up 50% in that period of time from what it was, which was from an incredible 1.2 months, depending on the price range, to 1.7 months. We're in the 1.7 months. So if that keeps trending up, we start talking a lot about the inflation. We have some hits on our employment, hits on people moving. It could escalate rapidly. But I think it is a great time to be doing pre-foreclosures. I don't know about the during foreclosures, and I think post foreclosures are just not worth it right now to mess with. But I do think pre-foreclosures are, and probably pre-foreclosures are the most complicated. Well, yeah, it's probably the most things that you have to know to be successful at doing pre-foreclosures than the other type, at the auction or after the auction. At the auction, there's a few things you need to know, but after the auction, it's just like, will they take my bid? It's out there. Will they take it? So anyway, so I'd say no tsunami, but lots more opportunities than normal. We have a person who is an asset manager, and what he shared with us is attorneys and mortgage companies that he deals with every day that for years and years as an asset manager. An asset manager is who handles the asset when it's going into foreclosure. So they're usually the first people to really know. Well, there's one other group that knows, and if you're a student, I'm happy to share that with you. But one of the first people, but not the first, that know that the foreclosure is going to happen is the asset manager. And what he shared with us is guys that he hasn't talked to, ladies and guys, attorneys, mortgage companies that he hasn't talked to. Remember, he's working with them once it becomes an asset. His phone's ringing a lot. And so the attorneys are starting to work their files. The mortgage companies are working their defaults. And there's going to be a lot more foreclosures heading to the auction block. And if we get there before they get to the auction block, then we'll probably have a good chance of getting a deal.
So what are a couple of things, to be looking for in a foreclosure, pre-foreclosure, as far as like, are there any risks to doing those? Is there a certain type of pre-foreclosure that does not make sense? Like you mentioned one, a few minutes ago where it sounded, pretty attractive from what you said, but y'all still ended up walking away from it. So what are some things that you can give our audience some tips on to look for to stay away from?
So in 2000, most of the investors that watch this show, even if they're experienced, they don't know what I'm about to tell them because they weren't doing this before 2007 and they started in 2008 or 2009, or even if they started in 2006 or 2005, they probably don't know what I'm about to tell them because they weren't good enough at that point to be involved in it. But in 2008, 2009, there were people that were giving away houses as door prizes to events because they had no value. And how that happened is they would take over somebody's existing mortgage in a sub-2, which we do. And it's something that you need to understand how it works. And in fact, we do a one-day class on sub-2s. So we haven't done one in a while. So that make sure that Brandon gets that on the agenda. But they had sub twos in 2008, 2009 when the market started crashing. They were giving those away for nothing, and it was because they had no equity in them. All they had was they had the paperwork, they had the ownership, but they also had the burden to pay the mortgage. And there were people weren't coming to the table to take over those loans. And so those sub twos were just being given away like candy at events and things. And because there was no equity. So one of the rules that we've always played by is and honestly, I find myself wanting to get in deals right now because it's such a strong seller's market. That's a rule we won't break. We just don't get into deals unless there's equity or unless we can control the cash flow. And sometimes in deals, depending on how it's structured, you can control the cash flow. Sometimes you can't. If the answer is you can't control the cash flow in the way the deal's structured and the market, what's happening in the market, then you can't do the deal. If you can't come in with equity, then we don't do the deal. So that guy that wanted to give us $30,000, he was literally upside down. So yeah, I could put $30,000 in my bank account, but would it be enough to get out of trouble if that house stopped performing? And when a lot of houses stop performing and you're buying in a market where you need the houses to perform, that's just not a good strategy. So 2008, 2009, they were giving them away. So the rule was, and if you started in 2006, you probably didn't own any sub twos because you hadn't figured out how to make it work yet, because it takes a couple of years. You got to be around the people that know what they're doing. And then you start slowly doing sub twos. The guys that were doing serial sub twos and tons of sub twos in 2005, 6, most of those guys went under if they started 2005 and 2006. So that we don't do that. We do them, but follow rules. So you got to have equity. You got to have controllable cash flow. You don't necessarily have to have equity because we play with, and I'm going to go into a rabbit hole. We play with net present value of below market interest rates because that changes what you're really effectively paying for the property. I'm sorry if you don't understand, maybe invite people on one of our coaching calls and we'll dive deep into that. But the key is you got to have controllable cash flow or you got to have real equity, because equity can change. And what happened with those people that are taking those sub twos, they didn't have the equity. So that's one thing to think about. If you're doing the pre-foreclosures, generally people look at equity as their main criteria. You got to be real careful with that, because in the foreclosure reports, oftentimes they'll say a house is worth $200,000, the debt is $195,000. Well, there's no equity in that, so it's not a deal we would pursue. But what if it was $195,000 in debt at 3.25% or 2% interest? Now that's controllable cash flow because our debt service is low. Now we got controllable, manageable cash flow. And really, you're not buying the house, you're buying the debt. And a lot of people don't understand that. It's that debt that we arbitrage. So we basically can get a higher interest rate on the house than what the debt is costing us and what the cost of managing the house is. So in that event, we can manage the cash flow. Now we want to look at the paperwork, make sure we can manage it. But if we can control and manage the cash flow, then we're staying with that baby and we're taking that on. And we're not so serious about the equity. So the underlying interest rate, don't be just looking at equity, look at the underlying interest rate. And another thing is, if you look on the foreclosure list, if you're looking at the ones that we get, where you're actually seeing where they make calculations, their calculations can be wrong because they're usually using public data to make those calculations. Public data is wrong all the time. It could be that somebody borrowed $195,000, but they got a windfall and they paid $25,000 in one check. Or typically the balance doesn't go down real fast. But like my wife, she double pays mortgages. So the balance is, if I was to have to get foreclosed on a property and you looked at the public data, it might show one number for some people, but the debt could be a lot lower. So be very, very careful not to be the guy that's just looking at equity. There's a lot more things to look at on the foreclosure reports, on the pre-foreclosures. To me, the pre-foreclosures are the most challenging, and it's the most exciting in the business that we're in. but it's challenging. And if you don't want to talk to people and meet people and be willing to cry occasionally when you meet these people because of what's happening in their life, and it's a lot of times it's not their fault. It's a tough business. If you don't want to do that, then you should be at the auction or you should be post foreclosure. And if you're not cut out for pre-foreclosures, you might not want to be doing them. But the other thing is, there's a lot of times we've helped people out. They were going to lose everything, and they were able to walk away from the deal and get what they needed to change, to make an improvement in their life. It's almost, now that I'm older, a lot of times I talk to these people like they're my contemporaries or they're my children, and I give them advice, and I say, this is what you need to do. And I put their needs above mine. I really do a lot of times. I'm a businessman, so I'm thinking about it, but there's a lot of ways people don't know the options they have, and you get in this and you become a good negotiator. And a good negotiator, if he's good, that's a weapon. And you got to decide if you're going to use that weapon ethically and ethically and morally, and also their situations. It's easy to take advantage of these people in this position, and but on the other hand, it could be Sunday night and Tuesday or wherever you're at, depends on where you're at. They could lose $100,000 in equity, and they're not going to get it if it goes to sell. And the people, I think all of us are like this. When there's something unpleasant we don't want to deal with, like if, for example, imagine you're overweight. Well, what overweight person wants to go see their doctor, right? We're all of us as human beings will stick our head in the sand and ignore things and procrastinate. And that's just the human nature. I mean, you can't be mad at people for doing that and ignoring things. It's not easy to deal with this kind of stuff. Sorry, that was a rabbit hole, but it's real life. If you're out there doing this, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
No, that was a good rabbit hole that you went down. So okay. You're forgiven on that. We're coming up on just about 10 or 15 minutes left. So I want to open it up for questions, and, so go ahead and leave those questions in the comments, and then Hal will get those to us. If you want to know more about how we can help you get set up to where you're prepared to invest and take advantage of these pre-foreclosures coming to us, comment me in the comments, and we'll reach out.
ME? You want them to type ME?
Me. I want to know.
Okay.
Because we all want to be in this, and we all want to do more deals. So me. We'll also put a link in the comments as well to where you can actually go straight there and book an appointment with us, and we'll give you a call for a short conversation. But we did have one question come in earlier in regards to buying tax foreclosures considering the redemption period. That's a little bit different than what we were talking about tonight, but I mean, it is part of the foreclosures.
I'm reading Hal's comment. So there are two main type of foreclosures. There's mortgage and there's tax. And in different states and do this slightly different. So I can tell you about Texas, but I've looked at a lot of other states, and for the most part, they're very, very similar. Tax foreclosures can be very technical. And in Texas, we have ad valorem taxes, so the property taxes, and then we have HOA taxes. And the rules are different, and the rights of redemption are different. And we've actually been involved in a long lawsuit on HOA, so we became very, very knowledgeable. I'm really glad. I'm glad we were in the lawsuit because I learned so much, and I'm glad the other side ended up paying for all the legal fees and all the education that me and our attorney got. And what's interesting is attorneys don't. A lot of times you hire them, but if it's something like HOA, the law was recently changed, and so they're learning in real time because there's not a lot of case law. And then we recently went to another pretty decent HOA event, and we learned a lot more about HOAs, and we had an excellent attorney. In fact, I want you to reach out to him, James, and see if we can interview him on our radio show on Saturday, and I'd love to. His name was David Berry. Very, very knowledgeable on HOA. Thank God I have a good network of advanced investors, because we had a situation where I wanted to get a really good HOA attorney that really knew his stuff. And I talked to about 15 referrals. And this guy, in my opinion, was the sharpest of all of them. He's the first one I talked to that that knew more than me. None of the rest, I guess, because we've had quite a big experience, knew that stuff, but he knew more. He knew exactly what would work, how to make it work. Anyway, so HOA is a little bit different than property taxes. There's generally speaking, there's two rights of redemptions for property taxes. It's 6 months and 2 years, 6 months or 2 years. So if it's considered a homestead, which almost all houses will by default be considered a homestead, it's very difficult for them not to be a homestead, even if the people didn't live there. And what I just said, you're going to say, what the hell are you talking about? That doesn't even make sense. Without explaining for 5 minutes why it makes sense, it does. And so it's either 6 months where it's non-homestead, 2 years where it is homestead. Almost all houses fall under the homestead, will end up falling under homestead. There's also like an agriculture and stuff like that where it's 6 months if it's it's an agriculture type ownership. So there's some different rules, but the two basic ones are homestead or non-homestead, 6 months versus 2 years. That just means that you can't sell the house and that people can redeem it. And this is where a lot of investors, they'll buy properties where they think they're going to turn around, fix it up and flip it, and they find out they can't get a title policy. And as far as I know, there's only one title company in Texas that will insure and give you insurance so that you can close under the 2 year right of redemption. But there's other strategies we can use when a right of redemption is involved. And if you're going to do taxes, you need to kind of get up to speed and understand how the tax foreclosures work. Let me share something with you. We just saw, and it's unbelievable to me, we just saw either with the tax sale or the HOA, if you do it wrong, you can lose your money. We just had somebody we know somebody that just put up over $100,000 buying an HOA lien, and we could have wiped them out. We chose not to wipe them out, but we were a lien holder on that property, and we fixed that HOA problem, but we could have wiped them out. We could have wiped out that $100,000. So that person that went to the sale and bought that tax lien, that HOA lien, they could have been totally wiped out. It's unbelievable. And we see that over and over and over. When I was partnering with Linda, a lot of our students were being brought deals all the time where people were, they were buying liens and they didn't do their research right. They didn't know what they were doing, and they lost everything. And that's why buying at the auction is dangerous, because a lot of people will say, oh, I have a title search. Well, title search by somebody that's an abstractor that's looking at deed records, unless it's a title plant, that's not real reliable. And a lot of people don't even know what I just talked about. And they're out there buying HOA. They don't understand the distinction of what I just said, which means they don't have basic foreclosure knowledge. And they're out there writing checks for $50,000, $100,000, and they're subject to lose all that money on that deal because they didn't know what they were buying.
So last call for any questions. We're going to wrap up. I got a question to ask you, just, in case the general public wants to know. Is there, when it comes to the life of the loan, is there any of them that you would turn away from in this market with a foreclosure? And for example, what I mean by that is if you get a pre-foreclosure lead and they just bought the house, say 3 or 4 years ago, and they're already in pre-foreclosure, is that a bad thing that you would run away from it? Or would you prefer that there is, like 10 or 12 years that they've had the loan because that means there's more equity?
I think that's a great question, James, because the second way is people tend when you're looking at 1,000 records, you got to break that 1,000 records down so it's manageable. Well, if you do the beginning, if you look at it and you do what everybody's doing and break it down the same way, then you're competing with all those people. So what can you do that puts you out of the mainstream just a little bit? What if you broke it down differently? So for example, if we know, for example, if a mortgage is, say it's a 30-year mortgage and it's 15 years old, it's about 70% of the principal balance is left. It's not 50%, it's 70%. If it's 22 years old, we know the balance is about 50%. And all you got to do is run some numbers in a financial calculator and you'll see that. So we know that going in, right? And if I want to look at a list and say, well, that mortgage is 15 years old, well, first of all, and then that should be the balance. And so therefore their equity should be X amount. Well, that's what the foreclosure groups, the people selling these lists, the better ones, the best ones, try to calculate these things that you need to know. So you say, oh, well, there's the equity. Well, how much did the house go up in value? Was there an 800 square foot extension added to that house that nobody knows about? Was there some other amenities added to that house? Did the people, even though they bought it 2 years ago, did they put 50% down? You know, so there's so many variables. So somehow when we're looking at this, don't do what I'm okay with you doing what everybody else does. But look for other ways. Look for other ways, other search parameters that are going to shed light to maybe deals that 80% of the people aren't looking at. And so you have to be smart on how you compile that list. Now, if you go and say, I'm going to hire a VA, every deal that's got 35% equity, then send that to me and I'm going to work them. Well, if you're in a big market, you're going to do what every single person does. Okay, so what I'm saying is you got to do something a little bit different in a big market if you want to regularly get deals and free foreclosures. If you do it the way the rest of the world does it, you might get a deal every 3 or 4 months instead of a deal every month or a couple of deals every month. So you just got to make sure your filters are right, that you're actually thinking about it, and you got to dig down. Right now, skip tracing, talking to people's never been so cheap. You can hire good people. So I would say you got to use more tools than just scraping the list and looking for equity spread, because it's not reliable.
All right. Well, I don't have anything else. Do you have any final statements from you, Ray, and then I can close this out?
Well, we just, we do have, I don't know the dates, but towards the end of January, we've got a 2-day class that we're doing. I think it's $199. So if people want to be a part of that, we're going to really dive deep in foreclosures, how to evaluate deals, what deals to look for, how to generate leads. We're going to spend a whole day on sub-twos, but we're going to spend a lot of time on how to structure creative deals, for example, things like sub-two. And then we're going to talk about how to figure out the time value of money and how to make killer offers. And then we'll talk about our scripts and how we negotiate with sellers to get them to say yes.
So if you want more information on that 2-day class he was just talking about, put class in the comments and we'll get you that information. But we're doing a class in Houston and a class in San Antonio. And you're going to be one weekend here in Houston and then the other weekend in San Antonio. So you'll have multiple opportunities to attend that class. And it's going to be the end of January and the first weekend in February, I believe. But we can give you more information on that. You can also find that at alamoria.org. You can find information on our events that we have coming up.
James, do they have a way to reach out to you if somebody wants to consider coaching? Because in our coaching, we spend a lot more time talking to our students on specifics. And I mean, the way we've got it is if it's something you want to know more about, then James should have a Calendly link that he could send you to, and he could tell you like in 5 minutes if we're a good fit to partner up or to work together. So
yeah, I can put that in the comments, or I can actually do that right quick, and then we can wrap up. We are going to be back next week. We do have our radio show this coming Saturday, which you can find that on 1070 AM. You can also find it on iHeartRadio, and we also simulcast that to YouTube as well. So you can find us there.
can they get to that radio show like through massivepassiveshow.com?
Yes.
Okay,
And
why don't you put that link in there, because that really gets you to everything. We put everything in that link.
Yeah. So those are already in the comments. The link to Calendly and the link to the radio show website, and our YouTube channel and everything. So on that note, that's all we got. Thank you, Ray. Everybody, if you're still watching, drop a thank you, Ray, because he dropped a lot of gems tonight. We call them golden nuggets or gems. And he did a really, really good job, gave a lot of valuable information there. So on that note, we are out. We will see you guys next Wednesday at 6 p.m. Bring a friend. Have a good night.
Thank you, Hal. Thank you, James.